Have you ever stood at a stranger's funeral, only to realize you were burying the father of your son? 20 years of marriage, trust, and fatherhood, shattered by one whispered sentence and a DNA test I never wanted to take. The truth didn't come crashing down. It crept up behind me and whispered in my ear, "You raised another man's child." My name is Richard Dawson. I'm 62 years old. I was an engineer for over 3 decades, retired just last year. I built a quiet life in Indiana. Modest home, small garden, a loving wife named Grace, and a son we named Jacob. He was the center of our world, or so I thought. Grace and I had been married for 25 years. We met at a company Christmas party when I was still a junior systems analyst. She worked in HR. She was bright, sharp-witted, and always knew how to fill a room with light. When we got married, everyone said we were the perfect pair. We struggled to have children. Years of fertility treatments, prayers, and heartbreak followed. Then, one day, miracle of miracles, Grace told me she was pregnant. We cried together. Jacob was born 8 months later. I didn't question a thing. That boy, I raised him with everything I had. Midnight feedings, Sunday baseball, math tutoring, scraped knees, and high school heartbreaks. I was there for all of it. He was mine. I knew he was mine. But now I don't know what's real anymore. They say hindsight is 20/20ths. Looking back, there were moments, small, quiet ones, that whispered something's not right. Like how Grace never wanted to talk about the early months of her pregnancy. Or how she'd get defensive when I brought up names for a second child. Or the one time I found an old college photo tucked away in her desk drawer with a man I didn't recognize and her smile just a little too bright. She told me it was just an old friend. I didn't ask questions. I trusted her. The cracks were there. I just didn't want to see them. Then 2 months ago, I read an obituary in the Sunday paper. Eric Matthews, 59, beloved brother and friend, passed away unexpectedly. I had never heard the name before, but Grace went pale when I showed her. She didn't say much, just that he had been a college acquaintance. When I asked if we should attend the funeral, she paused, then nodded slowly. I think it would be the right thing to do. It wasn't grief in her eyes that morning. It was something else, something guarded. What I didn't realize as I stepped into that church and watched her lay flowers on a stranger's casket was that I was about to bury my peace of mind forever. And what happened next? It changed everything I thought I knew about love, marriage, and fatherhood. The funeral of Eric Matthews should have been just another quiet Sunday obligation. But something about Grace's behavior that day kept tugging at me like a loose thread in the lining of a coat. Subtle, but if you kept pulling, everything could unravel. Grace didn't cry. She didn't speak to many people. She kept her eyes on the casket the whole time, like she was guarding a secret buried with him. After the service, a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, wearing a navy blue dress and an air of awkward familiarity, approached us. She looked at Grace, then at me. There was a pause. Then she said, "It's good to finally meet Jacob's father, even if like this." I must have blinked. "Excuse me." "Oh, sorry," she said quickly, glancing at Grace, who had frozen. I thought, never mind. Grace forced a smile. "This is my husband, Richard. This is Melissa, Eric's sister." "She's mistaken." We left quickly after that. In the car, I asked, why would she say something like that? Grace stared out the window. "I don't know. Maybe Eric told stories. You know how people talk." She said it casually, but her voice trembled. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake next to Grace, listening to her steady breath, wondering why I suddenly felt like I was in bed with a stranger. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I went looking. I'm not proud of it, but something in me had cracked. I pulled open drawers I hadn't touched in years, old journals, scrapbooks, and then a box tucked behind our old tax returns. Inside was a stack of photos, some of Jacob as a baby, but a few of Grace and Eric dated around the time she got pregnant. In one, her hand was on her stomach. Pregnant. With him. I felt sick. My hand shook as I picked up one envelope that said, "To be opened if I'm gone." It wasn't addressed to me, but to Jacob. I put it back. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed answers. Real ones. I called my lawyer friend, Alan. "Off the record," I said. "How do I get a DNA test without her knowing?" He was quiet. "Is this about Jacob?" Yes. Rich, are you sure you want to go down this path? No, I said honestly, but I can't live with a lie. He helped me figure out how to order a discreet home test kit. I took a cheek swab for myself. I waited until Jacob came over the next weekend and offered him a new toothbrush because his old one was worn. I collected the sample without him knowing. It took 12 days to get the results. And every day, Grace acted like nothing was wrong. Cooking dinner, watering the garden, making small talk about TV shows. But I watched her more closely. I saw the way she flinched when Jacob laughed just like him. When the envelope arrived, I sat in my garage, alone, staring at it for an hour. I already knew what it would say, but I opened it anyway. And when I read the results, I didn't cry. I just sat there as 20 years of fatherhood were erased in a single line. Probability of paternity, 0%. I stared at that white sheet of paper like it had just punched me in the gut. Zero. Nothing. Not even a shred of doubt. Jacob wasn't my son. You know what's strange? There was no dramatic scream. No tears. No broken glass. I just sat there, completely numb. It was like someone pressed pause on my entire life. For 20 years, I raised that boy. I held him when he was sick, taught him to ride a bike, cheered at his graduation. Every moment, every memory, I thought I was his father. I was his father. Except I wasn't. I didn't confront Grace right away. I needed time to think. I needed to process the rage, the betrayal, and the terrifying question that kept echoing in my mind like a hammer against steel. How long had she been lying to me? The next few days were a blur. I barely ate. I avoided Grace. I took long walks in the middle of the night, replaying the last 2 decades of my life like a movie reel on repeat. Every laugh, every hug, every bedtime story now felt tainted. Then came the moment I couldn't avoid. She found me sitting in the backyard, staring at the old tree house I built for Jacob. "You've been quiet," she said, sitting across from me. "Is something wrong?" I looked her dead in the eye. "I know Jacob isn't mine." Her face drained of color. What are you talking about?" "Don't insult me, Grace. I had a DNA test done." "I know." She opened her mouth, then closed it. For a moment, I saw her wrestling with the truth and losing. "I was going to tell you someday," she whispered. "When? On your deathbed? Or maybe never." I said, my voice rising. "You let me believe he was mine for 20 years. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. Eric said he'd step back if I raised Jacob as ours. I thought I could protect all of us if. "Don't you dare act like this was noble," I snapped. "You robbed me of the truth. You robbed Jacob of the truth. You let me give everything to a life built on a lie." "I didn't want to lose you," she said softly. "You lost me the moment you chose silence," I replied. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. But I didn't comfort her. I couldn't, because I realized something in that moment. This wasn't just about Jacob. This was about trust, about dignity, about a man who gave everything to a woman who looked him in the eye every day and lied. That night, I moved into the guest bedroom. I didn't know what I'd do next, but I knew one thing for certain. This story was far from over. I always thought heartbreak would feel like a clean break, sharp, devastating, final. But it wasn't. It was slow, silent, like bleeding out in an empty room. Every time I heard Jacob laugh down the hallway, every time I passed the family portraits, every time Grace tried to act like things could still be normal, the pain pressed harder on my chest. For a few days, I lived like a ghost in my own home. I didn't eat at the same table. I didn't sleep under the same roof. We didn't speak unless necessary. But when we did, it was cold, like strangers sharing a house after the fire had already taken everything. And Jacob, he had no idea. I kept looking at that boy, my boy, or at least the boy I raised, and wondering how much of his face came from the man who stole everything from me. Eric, my former best friend, my groomsman, the man I trusted around my wife. And he had died without ever saying a word. That twisted the knife even deeper. One night, Grace tried to come clean, or at least what she thought counted as clean. She sat me down and tried to explain the context of her affair. "It only happened once," she said. I said nothing. It was right before we got married. We were drinking. I didn't mean for it to happen. Still nothing. And when I found out I was pregnant, I didn't know. I hope you were the father. I truly did. Did you ever get a paternity test before now? I asked, already knowing the answer. No, she admitted. So, you lied by omission. For 20 years. Her silence was the only confirmation I needed. That night, I contacted Ruby, an old friend of mine from college who had become a divorce attorney. She was blunt, sharp, and didn't waste time with fluff. When I told her everything about Eric, about the funeral, the DNA results, she didn't even blink. I'm sorry, but I've seen this before, she said. You've got a strong case. You've got motive, proof of deception, a DNA test. And if you want revenge, we can go there too. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about clarity, about taking back control of a life that had been rewritten without my consent. I had Ruby start drafting divorce papers. I also asked about the legal side of paternity fraud. Did I have to keep supporting Jacob financially? Could I challenge past financial obligations? What would happen if this ever went public? We also discussed Grace's inheritance from Eric, something I hadn't thought about until Ruby brought it up. You might be entitled to a portion, she said. After all, she used your resources to raise a child. I left her office with a stack of paperwork, a legal strategy, and for the first time in days, a spark of clarity. Grace had made her choice 20 years ago. Now was my turn. There's a moment in every man's life when the silence stops hurting and starts sharpening. Mine came the day I slid the divorce papers across the kitchen table. Grace didn't even look surprised. Maybe she'd been waiting for it. Maybe part of her hoped I'd do the hard thing for her, so she wouldn't have to carry the weight of a decision. Cowards always hope someone else pulls the trigger. She looked up with those same tear-filled eyes I once found beautiful. Not anymore. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. But you did, I replied. Every day, for 20 years. I laid out the facts, clearly and without rage. I knew about Eric. I knew Jacob wasn't mine. And I knew she had chosen to bury the truth and let me carry a lie. Grace tried to negotiate, begged for understanding, said Jacob shouldn't suffer because of this, said we shouldn't throw everything away. But there was no we anymore. There hadn't been since I stood over a casket and realized I had been living in someone else's script. I called Ruby that same afternoon and had her initiate everything. The divorce filing undergrounds of paternity fraud and emotional deception. A legal motion to challenge long-term financial obligations regarding Jacob. And yes, a formal claim against Eric's estate, because Grace had accepted inheritance money from a man whose secret had already destroyed my family. I wasn't done. I printed copies of the DNA test. Not the details, just enough to show the timeline, the name of the lab, and the matching error. Then I mailed one to Eric's widow. She had the right to know her husband had fathered a child in secret. She deserved better. I also sent a sealed letter to Jacob's private school administrator, explaining that I would no longer be financially responsible for tuition beyond the current semester, and attached the legal documents. It wasn't revenge. It was responsibility, mine ending where it never should have begun. Grace fought back, of course. She claimed I was abandoning my son, said I had no heart, said she would tell Jacob everything and paint me as the villain. But Ruby prepared for that too. We had every message, every document, every receipt showing 20 years of my financial, emotional, and parental commitment. And we had the DNA. If she smears you, Ruby said, we'll countersue. You gave everything. They gave you a lie. Word got out quickly. Our neighbors noticed I moved into a condo on the other side of town. Family asked questions. Friends took sides. But strangely, I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. One evening, as I packed the last of my belongings, I came across a drawing Jacob had made when he was little. It was a crude crayon sketch, him, me, and Grace at the beach. He'd written my hero, Dad, at the bottom. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it carefully and took it with me. Because the truth was brutal, but I had been a father, even if only on borrowed time. They say karma doesn't need directions. It always finds the right doorstep. In Grace's case, it didn't just knock. It kicked the damn door off the hinges. A few weeks after filing for divorce, I began to hear whispers from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old friends, neighbors, even her sister. All of them wanted to share what they heard or saw on Facebook. I didn't care for the gossip, but I listened because every rumor turned out to be true. Grace was unraveling. Her teaching job, the one she once poured herself into, suspended her pending an ethics investigation. Apparently, a parent, who also happened to be a lawyer, had seen the court filings online and connected the dots. They weren't comfortable with their kids being taught by someone who'd hidden a 2-decade paternity fraud. I didn't even know that could happen. Neither did she. Worse yet, Jacob was now caught in the storm. He'd started asking questions. And Grace, cornered, humiliated, and desperate, had done the one thing Ruby warned she might. She told him her version of the truth. She said, "You were angry," Jacob told me, voice trembling when he called me one night, "that you didn't want to be my dad anymore." That shattered me harder than any lie Grace had told. I took a deep breath and met him in person. I didn't show him the test results. I didn't blame Grace. I simply told him the truth. That piece of paper doesn't change the fact that I raised you. I watched you take your first steps. I taught you to throw a football. I'm still the man who would have taken a bullet for you. Nothing changes that, not blood, not lies, not pain. He cried. I cried. We hugged. And then he stopped calling. I think Grace told him more. Or maybe he just couldn't process it. I don't blame him. But Grace? She lost everything. Her reputation? Gone. Her income? Terminated. Her friends? Most had already distanced themselves. Even her family turned cold. Her sister told me they were ashamed of her, especially after seeing how public things had become. Grace eventually moved out of our old home and into a cramped apartment in a bad part of town. She tried to fight for alimony, but the court dismissed it due to her fraudulent concealment. She tried to get Jacob's tuition reinstated through my name. That was denied too. And then, the final nail, Eric's widow filed a lawsuit against Grace for defrauding the estate. Apparently, Eric had left behind a will that made no mention of any child outside of marriage. Grace had accepted funds on Jacob's behalf, likely assuming it would never come to light. But it did. Everything did. They always say cheaters eventually lose more than they gain. Grace thought she was protecting her son, her comfort, her fantasy. Instead, she destroyed all three. They say when you lose everything, that's when you finally see what you truly had. But for me, it wasn't about what I lost. It was about what I survived. The weeks after Grace's downfall were oddly quiet. No more court dates, no more paperwork, no more lies unraveling like a ball of thread in my hands. Just silence. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. The house was too big, too still. Her perfume no longer lingered in the hallway. Her laughter, which used to feel like home, had become a ghost I no longer missed. But in that silence, I found something I didn't expect: clarity. I started with small changes. I canceled the cable we always fought over, donated the furniture she picked out, repainted the bedroom walls a shade of blue I'd always liked but she thought was too cold. I reclaimed my space, one quiet act at a time. And then I walked into a gym. The last time I'd lifted anything heavier than a grief-filled heart was decades ago. But something about the weights, the sweat, the focus, it anchored me. It was like rebuilding not just my body, but my boundaries. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted renewal. That's when I met Laura. She was a physical therapist, helping her father recover from a stroke. We struck up conversation over protein shakes at the community center cafe. She had a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Nothing flirtatious, just present, real. Laura didn't ask questions about my past. Not at first. She just listened and laughed. And one afternoon, after a few weeks of morning coffee and shared walks, she said something that stuck with me. You don't have to tell the story all at once. Just enough so your heart doesn't carry it alone. So I did. Not everything, just enough. She didn't judge. She didn't pity. She just nodded and told me her own story of betrayal, of rebuilding after a failed engagement that left her questioning her worth. Two broken people, slowly learning that healing wasn't about being whole again, but about being honest with your wounds. I never pushed her, and she never pushed me. But something about the quiet companionship helped me sleep better, eat better, live better. I reached out to Jacob again, left a voicemail saying I'd be at the park every Sunday afternoon if he ever wanted to talk. No pressure, just presence. He didn't reply. But that was okay. I'd learned not to anchor my worth to someone else's decisions. These days, I cook my own meals. I listen to vinyl again. I read the paper on the porch like I used to when life was simple. I smile more. Not the smile that hides a storm. The smile that says, I made it through. Grace's betrayal didn't define the end of my life. It just marked the beginning of a more authentic one. A few years passed. Life had mellowed into something soft and steady. My morning walks turned into quiet rituals. The gym became less about rebuilding and more about maintaining peace. Laura and I, well, we never rushed anything. We simply let time do what time does best, reveal what's worth keeping. Then one chilly October morning, I received a letter. A real one. Envelope, stamp, her handwriting. It was from Grace. I stared at it for a long while, the way a man might stare at a snake he thought he'd already buried. Eventually, curiosity won. I opened it. She wrote from a long-term care facility in Vermont. Her health had declined sharply. Her tone wasn't manipulative. It wasn't even apologetic in the dramatic way I'd grown used to. It was quiet, honest. She admitted she had failed. Not just me, but Jacob too. She had told him the truth in the final months before the funeral. He hadn't taken it well. They fought. He left home and didn't return until weeks later. But he did come back. And before he passed, they made peace. He said he forgave me, she wrote, but I don't think he meant it. And I don't blame him. Then came the line that hit hardest. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope one day you can forgive me too. If not for me, then for you. Because I've learned that guilt is just another prison, and you don't belong in it. She asked for nothing. No visit. No call. Just understanding. I sat with her words for hours, letter trembling in my hands. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt hollow, but not in the way I had before. This was different. I wrote her back. I didn't write a novel. I didn't scold her. I simply said, Grace, I don't know if forgiveness is a moment or a process, but I've come to believe it's more for the forgiver than the forgiven. I don't forget what happened, and I never will. But I let go of the bitterness. I wish you peace in the time you have left. Weeks later, I received word that she had passed. There was no funeral, just a box mailed to my door. Photos of Jacob growing up, a silver locket with his name etched inside, and a note from her nurse saying Grace asked that I have it all. I held that locket for what felt like a lifetime, and for the first time in years, I whispered his name out loud. Not with anger, but with love. Jacob, he wasn't mine by blood. But in every memory, every birthday, every scraped knee, every bedtime story, I was his father. And that would never change. Now, on quiet Sunday mornings, I still sit on that same bench in the park. Sometimes, Laura joins me. Sometimes I sit alone. But I always bring two things, that silver locket and peace. Because while Grace's betrayal shaped my past, forgiveness shaped my future. And in that future, I choose to love what remains instead of mourning what never truly was.